What do you think, Jay? Am I right? Am I wrong? And let's talk about those references of that in those two books that you have.
Yeah, I just did a talk. I had to take it off YouTube because it was too edgy for that platform. I had to put it on Rockfin, but I just did a talk on this character from the Frankfurt School, critical theorist, Wilhelm Reich. And Reich was part of the school that thought that you could take Freudian principles and basically destroy a civilization for what he thought would be the proletariat revolution. That ended up not happening, but the power block in the West basically took the principles of sexual revolution that he said way before the 1960s counterculture people. And what he was basing it on was ancient studies of what he thought was the primordial Gaia pre-civilization to whatever patriarchal masculine civilizations rule today. He thought there was this like primal sort of, feminist, new agey, in tune with nature, feminine religion, and that patriarchal religion supplanted that. So the way to revolutionize society was through mass sort of pansexual promotion, and that included kids as well. So he was an early advocate, even before Kinsey, of sexualizing kids. But he explicitly did it for a Marxist socialist intent.
What's the actual like implication of once you make everyone perverted? How does that lead to the proletariat's rise? What was his logic?
Well, it destroys the family unit.
Yeah, his logic was that if you have a patriarchal society, what men tend to do is set boundaries. So there's going to be limitations to like private property is a masculine boundary, he argued. A husband and wife is a masculine boundary.
Kind of makes sense because like men would be the one to defend the homestead.
Exactly, yeah. And he thought that if you undermined the men, made them weak, made them Skittles, shall we say, and on, that this, if you did this
Fruity Pebbles?
on a mass scale, he said, right, this would weaken the civilization so that it could then be primed for what he thought would be Marxist revolution.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Isn't that crazy?
Luke has said repeatedly throughout our time doing this show that that basically demons enter through the butthole. Confirm or
I was
deny?
going to get to that next.
All right, please.
Clint is very concerned.
Yeah.
He's very worried right now.
Demons and angels, just so you know.
Oh, well, then I've got both. That's good.
Fecal implants. But I want to talk more about that maybe another day.
That's
Sorry to
what,
interrupt.
well, Dan Brown, Angels and Demons, Dan Brown. We're talking about Brown.
Yeah.
Dan Brown, Angels and Demons. Anyway.
No, please answer the question.
word
Do
association.
demons get into people through their butthole?
Dan's making Brown. I don't know.
Or Dan
terrible
Green,
joke.
depending
Dan
on what you
Green.
ate for dinner.
Okay, there you go.
Jay, goddammit, answer my question. Do demons
He's
get-
worried. He's so worried.
I just think this is such a bizarre perspective. And Luke's the only person I've ever heard say it. And then now Top Lobster starts
So here-
saying it.
well, here's
Like, is
what-
it fucking true or not?
So what Luke's talking about is that certain cults that were very powerful, that, for example, rose out of the British Empire and in circles of Germany. That you had in Germany the OTO, which was people like Theodore Royce, Karl Kellner. And then in Britain, you had Aleister Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And Crowley left the Golden Dawn magical order when he was young to join the OTO of the weird German magicians. And they thought that you could channel your reproductive power into the sexual act, and through the semen that you produced, that semen could then be charged and become part of a ritual version of the Eucharist or a ritual version of the Lord's Supper. So
Are these people
that's-
insane?
You could argue that, but I mean,
genuine question.
They took it seriously. But to tie it to today, like maybe 15 years ago, Jay-Z and Beyonce got really into Crowley, and Jay-Z was wearing a lot of Crowleyan garb and gear. They were putting a lot of that imagery and ideology into their videos, talking about being into Crowley.
He was BFFs with fucking Abramovich with the spirit
Yes.
cooking shit.
And Lady
Spirit
Gaga
cooking.
doing a lot of rituals, doing a lot of kind of symbolic gestures, but also more importantly, these kind of occulted like rituals that a lot of people believe were summoning in a lot of these entities.
Yes, exactly. My wife's got a great book on that too. She's got another book on Hollywood mind control.
Is it a historical book? Is it a fictional book? Is it a
Her
children's?
book
Is it
is
is it a children's book?
It looks like that, but it's made to be like a coffee table book. But when you read it, you're like actually reading about like mind control and sex magic. And
Okay, so how's the mind control work?
well, in one sense, like MK Ultra programs did include studies of sexuality, studies of. I mean, it's vast, right? So we have everything from LSD all the way to like dosing Dolphins with John C. Lilly.
And then there's also trauma-based mind control. There's also torture. There's also gaslighting. There's also so many different manipulative kind of techniques that are really just we can keep going at listing them on. But they tried everything. There's scopolamine as well, another kind of substance that does induce mind control.
There's
That is actually-
scopolamine,
that is fucking real. That the CIA, absolutely has, absolutely probably used, and absolutely probably already has now, and refined in a way where they could just use it at any moment at any time.
But to go back to Crowley, he was an asset for British intelligence. I did an interview a while back with a professor named Dr. Richard Spence. He wrote a book called Secret Agent 666, which is about Crowley's work for British intelligence.
Wow.
And he was also partying quite a bit with Aldous Huxley. They were doing drugs together, and Dr. Spence argues that this might have been where Huxley got the idea for what would become the proto MK Ultra programs, because it actually starts in the UK before it comes over to U.S. military.
This is the same Huxley that wrote Brave New World.
Correct, yeah. And so Brave New World is written about this future drugged and actually pedo society. Because if you read Brave New World really carefully, we just did a whole 4-hour podcast reviewing it. I read it 10 years ago and I missed this pedo element. But if you read it again, I think it's the end of chapter 3, the World Socialist Controller guy, Mustafa Mond, at the end of that chapter, there's a child that he's talking to, and they have what they call erotic play in this future dystopia of the children. And he says, in the context of the erotic play, let the children come unto me. So he's like sort of being a Christ-like figure, but he's a pedo Christ figure. It's really crazy. But that's because like this whole Wilhelm Reich like stuff was studied by these social engineers as a technique for social control.
Well, I've always thought that there was interesting timeline correlation with the end of World War II, kind of forgiving the Japanese to get their intel on their torture programs, and then also paperclip and having some of the Nazi soldiers come in.
And the Japanese soldiers as well.
Right. Yeah. So is that not, does that I don't know the exact timeline with Crowley,
so
but does that
basically-
overlap?
It does. I mean, like all of these countries at that time were doing similar types of programs. The Soviets were doing similar studies into not just MK Ultra-ish type stuff, but they were studying Sci-Spies, ESP, all the same stuff that Stanford Research was studying with remote viewing. So it's like parallel programs. And Paperclip was Nazis coming to the U.S., but the British and the Soviets also took. It's like they chopped up the leftover Nazis and they took them all over.
Yeah.
One of this
Because we had to get rid of the evil by adopting it.
Yeah,
Obviously.
exactly. And the CIA, if you look at the history of Western German intelligence, you might think, oh, well, that's the free Western people against the Stasi. That was the Gehlen organization. That was Reinhard Gehlen of the Nazi spy network. Wow. That was his network that became German intelligence.
Well, question for you, because Tucker Carlson stepped out of line by talking about UFOs being interdimensional beings, possibly angels, demons. I'm just curious, what's your read on that assessment? It seemed like, I know he's got a good relationship with Alex Jones. Alex has talked about that in the past too. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think there's two things going on. There is a really in-depth psychological operation going on with aliens as a black op. There's a great documentary. Well, more so just the entire narrative of, if you go back to the original stories of George Adamski, he was the first abductee. If you look into that story, it's very fanciful, but this sort of set the stage for future stories of abductions, right? But his story is completely fraudulent. It was exposed as being cribbed from a sci-fi novel, and anybody who would question him, the head of the CIA would prosecute them. So Alan Dulles was running point for this total quack.
So they wanted this story to stick.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted this narrative, I think. If you watch the documentary Mirage Men, it's a really well done, high production value documentary that goes into the history of the alien phenomena from the Black Ops perspective. I do think, though, there are unexplained things. I don't believe in extraterrestrial beings, but I think that there might be demons.
I just found it very interesting
In
to have William Cooper in Behold the Pale Horse. As soon as you pick that book up, he automatically talks about these kind of these kind of UFOs, these kind of saucers that fly in the air at very fast speeds, and then kind of go underwater and fly at those same kind of speeds as well, defying the laws of physics. Essentially, what Tucker Carlson was pretty much explaining and describing on the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, I don't know if Tucker Tucker Carlson read Behold the Pale Horse, or if he's maybe just kind of alluding to personal information, because he says people from the government come to him and give him information. Could this be a gaslight effort, or could this be something that legitimately is real, and could these interdimensional beings be in these kind of aircraft?
There's a couple of things I think that they're talking about when they talk about drones, craft that can go underwater at the same speed that they can go through the land. That's called warp drive. They've been working on it. At least NASA's been public about it for about a decade. There's two ways you can produce warp drive that we know of. There's one called soliton projection, where you create these solitons. The solitons are like ripples in a pond, and you create like a static rippled pond thing around your craft, which can distort space-time. There's also what's called supercavitation, where you use, I think, lasers, and you focus them into a point in front of you. It cavitates space, creating a vacuum that then the craft is pulled into. Which, so instead of propulsion, you're actually being, pulled. You're being retracted towards your destination. And I think if you create a warp field around your craft, then you could cavitate water as well as air and just move at the same speed. So I think they've had this technology. I mean, Tesla was working on longer. Maybe they've got fusion packs on board with really lightweight metamaterials like aluminum. There's so many different cermats you can use that can handle extreme high temperatures. 1998, they told us about graphene for the first time. God knows how long they've actually been working with this stuff. But that's what I see. I see no reason to speculate on God and devil and bullshit like that. Like, not that there aren't interdimensional forces at work, but like, this is real tech.
And I would push back gently and just say, I think there is a larger kind of spiritual religious component to all of this that you can't really quantify in scientific terms, but I think is real. Let's get back talking about the interdimensional beings and spirit cooking and all this other stuff that Jay is an expert
You got
in.
like 6 books here, so like, how deep does this shit go?
I always have the books with me because I never know exactly, what topics are coming.
Jay,
so.
you said that you think that they might be demons. Why?
I think there is a demonic element to it, and a couple of things that would make me think that is if you look at a couple of the MK Ultra people, like Dr. John C. Lilly. He wrote a book that was about how to reprogram human beings through viewing them like they're basically biological computer meat sacks, and he thought that you could reboot the base programs, which are like our whatever evolutionary, our primal evolutionary lizard brain, monkey brain, whatever. You could reboot that and then re-imprint and give people new layers of reality and meaning. And through really kind of wild, like mad science type stuff, almost Mengele type stuff. And he talks in that book about doing this to kids, giving them high doses of LSD to reprogram them. So you think,
That's not a good idea.
Well, you think, well, where would he get this? The book is, by the way, is Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer. And his autobiography, if you read that, there's a fascinating introduction where he talks about actually Tim Leary wrote the introduction to his autobiography and says that I view John C. Lilly as the new Aleister Crowley. And you think, well, how would you make the connection between Lilly and Crowley? As you read the book, Lilly goes into talking about how he got a lot of the ideas for putting the microchips into monkeys, putting the microchips into dolphins. He had a weird dolphin fetish. And he says that when he would do really intense trips in the float tanks. So there's a movie about him. What's the name of that movie? Do you remember it? The float tanks. Is it Jeff Bridges? Anyway,
I'll look it up while
There's a
you're talking.
70s movie that's about Dr. John C. Lilly, Altered States. Ooh. Okay, so if you watch that movie, that's about him. And when he would go into these altered states, he would dissociate, and he was always thinking that he was interacting with these entities. And according to him, is like, well, I was getting a lot of these tech ideas from my float tank entities. He calls them aliens. So, I mean, if you have a kind of a religious worldview, like, it's kind of obviously demons.
So do you think that's like the narrative of demons from like early man is from psychedelic use and encountering? Because like Rogan and all these people, Cernovich in particular, Mike Cernovich, he talks about this a lot. That we had him on the show, and he was talking about how doing DMT, you meet these machine elves. The machine elves are in fact demons. I have no fucking opinion. I've never done it, but it's always intrigued me. That narrative has always intrigued me, particularly as an agnostic person, someone who's not very religious. The whole concept of angels and demons has always been hard for me to wrap my head around.
We have a Rumble rant related to this. Steph, grab the mic and read this one in the right-hand bottom corner.
Got it. So there's the audience talking
No,
And I
right
wanna
here, bottom
say
right-hand corner.
We have Ouija 49 saying, from personal experience, I think Tucker is right. I have to sub and call in sometime. I've died before, and when I encountered one of them, there was a similar sensation to being on the other side.
I'd love to hear about it. So definitely call in sometime.
Now, and a lot of people report having these kind of similar experiences on DMT. And there's also cosmonauts within the U.S. government that literally have DMT directly injected into their veins for long periods of time so they could induce this larger kind of interdimensional state that they're able to actually talk to these green little people and these entities and converse back and forth with them for a prolonged time, not just for a short
They
DMT
call
trip
it
as well.
extended state DMT,
Yeah.
and they're doing it. I know in England they've been doing it.
I was at Burning Man. They were trying to do it with with DMT vape pens extensively, and don't recommend that to some people. We also have 2 other Streamlabs. Steph, can you read these Streamlabs, please?
So we got Terps saying, we know Clint is worried about demons getting up your beehole for a good reason. That thing's probably gaping down there. His vibrator stays charged.
Oh shit! Solid state.
Terps continues. He continues by saying, on a more serious note, he says Crowley was a disgusting man. Manly P. Hall said something along the lines of, he was a great example of how low the human intellect can go. He practiced black tantra. White tantra is when you retain the carnal lusts are transmuted to spiritual gold.
What do you think about that
Wow.
comment, Jay? Is it
No,
is it
this is
correct?
true. Crowley said that the eye of Horus is far more powerful than the mouth of Isis. The mouth of Isis is the vagina. The eye of Horus is the butthole, which you alluded to earlier. But I think that you're right that the high doses of those kinds of drugs do access the demonic realm, but I don't think that's where we get the idea. I think there really are demons.
Is it a demonic realm or is it an interdimensional realm that has
well,
many different
yeah.
kind of spirits and entities? Some of them are dark, some of them are light,
Right.
some of them are allegedly good, some of them are angels, some of them are demons. What's your kind of overall, if we could take a step back, what's your kind of overall understanding of this kind of world and this kind of interdimensional play that we keep getting kind of reference to, since obviously there is something energetically going on that we can't quantify with our senses. Obviously there is a spiritual component, a religious component to all of this that a lot of people are having a hard time just kind of pinning down. Do you have an understanding of it? Did you pin it down yourself, or are you still discovering this larger kind of spirit and realm world that we're all kind of hearing about so much more?
I see a dog in underwear, so I feel like I'm in a acid trip right now.
Wow,
so, like, there's a dog wearing underwear.
Yeah,
That is
that's
real.
Atlas. She has her period.
I feel like I'm in a skit. It's a lifetime, real time.
Yeah,
skit.
she's
Anyway.
coming. She's coming over to you now. Atlas,
She
get on
heard
the
me.
couch.
She knew I was talking about
Atlas,
her.
let's
Good
go.
job.
Come on, let's get on the couch, please.
I want to say about angels and demons, because I think what it is all aspects of God. That God will give you your own demise if you allow it to become your own demise, and it will give you your own challenges. And these things are challenges to overcome. It's like all the cells in your body and the pathogens, the viruses and the bacteria. But like Luke has viruses and cells and bacteria, but it's all Luke. Like it's still Luke, even though those things are within him. It's making him. So he is the whole, and the things within are like the pieces within. But it's all part of the whole, and it just kind of depends on how you look at it.
From my understanding, which is limited of biblical scripture, aren't the demons just fallen angels? So wouldn't they be?
In the biblical thing, I think that they just demonized people. The people that lost the war in heaven, like Michael and his cult, were like tripping on fucking some drugs and having group hallucinations and channeling God. And then Lucifer was like, you guys got to give the electricity to the plebes because it's ancient tech. They had it. And they were like, no, it's too dangerous. Can't give the electricity to the plebes. So Lucifer went and gave it to them. He's like, look, you can make light. And they were like, we're going to war for that technology. And then they went and they incinerated everything and called it burning hell. And they said, they're all demons, all those dukes and kings, and just forget they're evil. Don't even ever question it.
Yeah.
That's what I got from the Bible stories.
Jay, do you have any kind of like rules for this kind of a greater, bigger understanding that you have? Some people say that you should take DMT. Other people are saying don't. You don't know what you're entering into. Some people say that there's kind of practices that they have within themselves not to be affected by these demons. Do you have any kind of practical experience or tips or tricks to deal with what is clearly some kind of larger energetic energy around us that we're having a hard time understanding?
I mean, I would not recommend it. I did acid multiple times when I was younger. The first time I did it, I had a really bad trip. I did have an experience with some sort of entity. It was like a point of light. I blacked out, and it was a point of light. It communicated for about 4 hours, but I would not recommend it. It was a terrible experience. Never had a good. Well, there was a few acid trip experiences that weren't bad, but I don't think that like the shortcut to experience is really what you want. I don't think that's necessary because a lot of those things can be very deceptive. So if there are demonic entities, if there are interdimensional entities, just by having an experience to see if that's real and if it exists, we're really putting ourselves in a really dangerous position to be deceived, I think.
And I'm not saying I believe it, but a lot of the elites believe it. A lot of very powerful people in our society play into it, and they do a lot of rituals around it, and they're part of so many different activities that does kind of surround these entities and these creatures and these larger kind of interdimensional worlds that, according to Tucker Carlson, have an agreement and an alliance with the U.S. federal government that they're working hand in hand with. So that's his understanding of it, and it is fascinating to see so many prominent, powerful people. You see a lot of people in numerology also play a lot into this as well. So my kind of thing is that I'm always trying to get a bigger understanding of everything, and I'm always searching for knowledge. But a part of me also is like, maybe we're not supposed to know. Maybe we're not supposed to keep digging for this larger kind of truth here, because if we do, it kind of ruins the larger experience of life that we have here on this earth.
Were you gonna say?
Yeah, my thoughts on demons is it's like demons are a result of if you're afraid of God, it becomes a demon. So I experienced the voice. I know what it is. I spoke to it within my mind. I communicated, "Speak to me, demon. Communicate with me now." And I called it to me, and it started speaking. And it made this voice, this terrifying sound, this.
Were you on any kind of substances?
I'd been taking psilocybin for about 5 days straight and meditating in my hammock. It was at Burning Man, so there's all this music playing. It's this vibration, and out of the sound came the voice. And I was like, well, I just launched a demon, and I think this is real. And I was like, I have two paths. I can be afraid of this thing, or I can be calm. So I chose calm, and I listened to it. And it made the noise, and it was terrifying, and it was angry, and I heard it all. And then I kept listening, and then it calmed down, and then it thanked me for listening to it, and it dissipated.
Whoa. What a fucking story, dude. Holy shit.
Well, on this topic, I would say there's a really good book I'd recommend by a philosopher and theologian from the Orthodox tradition. That's where I come from. And his name is Father Seraphim Rose. And he wrote a book called Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. And he talks about it's his take on psychedelics. He was in the kind of counterculture movement. He did psychedelics at one point, I think. And then he moved into being a monastic, an Orthodox monk, and wrote this book reflecting on that. He was actually way ahead of a lot of the conspiracy stuff. He was writing this in the 70s, talking about the New World Order, warning about this kind of stuff. And in that book, he deals with like transcendental experiences, meditation, and so forth. But that book, I think I would recommend that to people that are interested in. I think that it's very likely that Tucker might have been reading that because a lot of what's in that book kind of echoes.
What's the
what he
name
was
of the
saying.
book again?
Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose, R-O-S-E.
I'm going to definitely check that
That's
one
Christian
out.
Orthodoxy?
Yes, yeah.
Again comes the Seraphim. We were
Yeah,
just talking about
Kyle,
Kyle,
yeah.
Seraphim.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that conversation between
Synchronicity.
Joe Rogan that was talking about aliens and Tucker
Yeah.
Carlson that was talking about demons.
Yeah.
I asked a poll. I was like, who do you think is more right here? And it was kind of split, which is pretty interesting. But there's so many weird things in the occult. There's so many weird things that we were just talking about, especially when it comes to Aleister Crowley, his connection to Huxley, even Eric Blair, otherwise known as George Orwell. He also worked in intelligence in the UK, and the stuff that these two authors were able to kind of piece together, put together in their kind of literature that they got out there to the general public was really what a lot of people believe to be a warning to the general public of what they had planned and what they're kind of carrying out on the long-term kind of scale here. As it is kind of interesting as this kind of overall thesis of a one world government, total domination, total control is always there throughout written, recorded human history. It's almost as if there's kind of an entity, or some would say a demon, that's always influencing the Stalins, the Mao Zedongs, the Hitlers, the Mussolinis, the Caesars, the individuals that try to take take control of everything. That's my kind of limited understanding of it. And I don't know if you have anything to say about any of those particular individuals that I just mentioned or their role in this, but it really does seem like this is always a constant, and this is always something that has been plaguing humanity from kind of the beginning of time.
Yeah, you go back to Babel, right? I mean, the story in Genesis 10 of the Tower of Babel is this attempt to create a one world government, even back then, motivated by a kind of, satanic power, satanic desire for humanity to worship a single human leader or whatever.
Is it?
Leader
Am I
of the
correct
state.
that they wanted to abolish all other languages so that they would all speak the same? Is that true?
Well, the idea was that we would create they would create a unified economy, some form of unified language. The text says that they were working towards that. What exactly that means, I don't know. And then we get the story that it was confused. The languages were created after that to keep man from doing this thing. So
Interesting.
yeah, I think that same drive is there in a lot of these world empires that we've seen. And then it sort of culminates in the move that we have today. And, Babel is the archetype of that for sure.
I actually want to make a comment about the alien agenda. I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but I really want to know, has anyone ever thought that maybe it's all like a psyop? It's just like, if it's so prolific and allowed to be talked about, then it must be something to distract us or deter us from what actually is. And one of my main questions is, what if the aliens don't come from like some outer space? What if we're not supposed to be looking up? We're actually supposed to be like looking what has been here? Maybe
Yeah.
like hiding this whole time.
I think it makes sense. Nassim Harame's technology, he's like every proton is two protons spinning around each other at the speed of light, creating like a black hole. So like the energy and information within is real, and it's coming without. I don't know if aliens are necessarily corporeal, but it seems like it is being generated from within everything.
Like specifically, I'm talking about like all of these extraterrestrial races that there's a lot of New Agers that talk about this stuff, like the avian race, or the Arcturians, or the Lyrians, or all these different like places and galaxies and different things. I just find it really interesting that this story keeps going, and there's even people talking about like secret space stations and like all these kind of stuff. To me, it's like, why are we being like promoted all this information about like out there?
Just to tie this into the Tucker point about, maybe we shouldn't be looking to outer space. Tucker actually was talking about the spacecraft existing under the water. So that I thought that was really interesting. If it's true, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Ashton Forbes. One of the best episodes of Liberty Lockdown I ever did was Ashton and Mr. Crossland over here, and we talked about MH370, and that was actually the technology that you were describing earlier when it comes to essentially creating a micro black hole that you fall into, and that's the propulsion. So that's why you don't see any propulsion behind the vehicles. Like, this shit is all just so interesting to me. I honestly. I struggle to imagine that it's all government programs, just because I feel like if they had it, they would have already taken over the rest of the governments all over the world. So then I start to get more into the spiritual realm. But as an agnostic, that challenges me too. So I'm in the mist here.
You want to answer
the
that?
best book on this phenomenon being terrestrial and being in large part a deception is Invoking the Beyond by the Collins brothers, and there's about a middle 300 pages that's just devoted to all the history of the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement in going all the way back to the first abductions, Roswell, all that. So I think that's largely a psyop, but there is something else going on, I would say, with all the people who've had these experiences and claim to, get ideas, revelations, experiences, from entities. But also keep in mind, like, the entities could be deceptive, right? True. Even people from the establishment who have been a part of this phenomenon, like Jacques Vallée, he's not a Christian. I think he's some sort of hermeticist. But even he says that this is a large-scale terrestrial deception.
I think also it's interesting too, like the Steve Jobs of the world. He totally revolutionized the world with his cell phone technology, and he was very well known for being a massive acid head. And it's like, but he also described it as like that's where he got his ideas from. It is interesting because we've always theorized that, like, if the Roswell crash, and if we actually, that's where we got microprocessors, and that's where the internet all came from. It was basically alien technology that was seeded through crashes. Like, this is all, it goes deep, man. I don't know what the answer is.
It
It's just
seems like
interesting as
such
hell.
a side because it's such a good story just to tell people to get them to be like, "Dang, okay."
I agree with that, but If you look at the uptick in technology from Roswell time to now, it's fucking unbelievable the quantum leap that we've made from all of human history until now, and then it's like all of a sudden we go.
But except Tesla, Nikola Tesla's wireless energy transfers, like I think they just wiped his lab and then started building on top of it. I think
That's
they
possible.
raided his lab in the
Trump's
20s.
uncle raided his lab.
Yeah, Fred. I think his name was Fred,
Yeah.
or was that his father? It was his
No, his
uncle,
uncle.
John Trump, John D, something like that. They raided Tesla's lab. They took it all. They I don't know, they burned it to the ground, but they basically he was doing wild. He had wild technology he was working on at the
Trump's
time.
uncle raided it.
Yep. Trump's uncle raided Nikola Tesla's apartment right after he passed
Look
away.
at these balls. They're great. They make your hair stand up. They're wonderful. I love these balls. They're great. They're wonderful.
We are ending our podcasts now by asking a question from the previous guest. So we're going to ask you that question, and we're going to ask you to ask a question for our future guest. Steph, do you have that question lined up?
Yeah, I do. I have the question. The question is,
Took you long enough. Let's go.
what do you think of the term Judeo-Christian values?
It really depends on what a person means, because in a sense, you could say that does the Old Testament in some sense reference Judaism? Yeah. Is post-Christianity rabbinical Judaism identical to the religion of the Hebrews in the Old Testament? Not necessarily. So it kind of depends on what a person means, but most of the time it's kind of a term that's misleading that gives the impression that Jews and Christians have a common belief in God, and they don't. So